So I'm going to give you the non-marketing department written bio for Julian, having been calling on him probably for the last 10 years. And this is how I would describe him and why we wanted him on this particular panel discussion. He is the perfect storm of someone who deeply understands ad technology and really the guts of how an ad gets served, as well as complicating his life with studying consumer usage, which is why he is spending so much time in mobile these days. And then the third prong is he brings all of this passion as if he were watching a sporting event to both. And so this is the perfect storm. But get ready, because he keeps it very real, and you need to bring your thick skin when you're having a discussion. So I'm there, I'm in sales, skin is already thickened from 10 years of calling on him. And so
that makes me feel good.
So we'll start with the thing that you probably care about by asking you, what would you say are the top 3 things marketers want from their publishers today?
Well, I think number 1 is quality content, right? I think marketers are very sensitive about where they place their ads and how content has a real impact on how consumers view their brands. I think data, obviously, and that's kind of a given, if you will, but understanding and making sure that things are measurable plays a huge part in how marketers choose to invest. I think the other piece really is insight from the data, but I think you're looking at the end of the day, you're looking at measurement, the data from the measurement, content, and eyeballs, right? You want quality eyeballs. I want eyeballs that are going to buy product. Reality is we're all trying to sell something, right? So if the marketer's trying to sell a product, you want the right eyeballs in front of it that are going to end up, consuming their products. That's what they genuinely care about.
So it's like these are the things that have always been important, and as you even market your own sites, these are things that are important to you guys as marketers. But let's talk a little bit about content, because as the gal who sort of talks to a lot of brand marketers on your behalf, when I look at what advertisers want from premium content and safe content, and actually how their consumer is using mobile devices, I'm finding it not matching.
No, it does not match.
And so they want, let's just use like an audience, like I want a business traveler, or I want a mom. And I try and explain to them, which is sort of what we saw at Banny tell us, well, okay, then you know what? You might need to be in games. And they say, no, but I don't want games. Meantime, engagement might be higher, but they want this sort of safe place, which doesn't have as many eyeballs as this, what they would deem unsafe, but actually has higher engagement, higher eyeballs, higher growth, et cetera. What do you advise?
Well, it's a catch-22, right? Look, I think at the end of the day, when we start looking at data and things become slightly more measurable, I think you'll see advertisers start to shift a little bit, and you can kind of see how that's happened, from television to cable, or from television to digital, right, in general. So I think marketers adjust. I think it just takes them a significant amount of time. There has to be enough information for them to make informed decisions. And I think a lot of the challenge, inherently with mobile is beyond the fragmentation. It's the lack of true measurability and scale on our side of the table, which has kind of slowed this down. I think that's obviously being addressed, and with you guys' announcement today, and you guys having a stack, and several other large organizations kind of owning a stack that helps kind of aggregate a lot of this information. I think we'll start to see a shift, but it's certainly moving a glacier. That's the reality of it. But having said that, again, brands are very, very, and I don't want to be redundant, but they're very, very sensitive about where they place their brand. And oftentimes, you could use, and this is a weird analogy, but I'll use it anyway, lots of people consume porn. yet you don't see a lot of premium advertisers there. So the content does matter, right? So, when you're thinking about, what makes sense for a brand, you have to take some of that into account. I think the marketer has to take that into account. The agency, as an agent and representative of the marketer, clearly has to take that into account, in order for them to keep this business. But as we start to see more data and more information, I think that there'll be some shifts, but it does take time.
So to be blunt, what would make you pay a higher premium or CPM?
That's a tough question to answer because I'm the guy that gets the CPMs down. So inherently, that's a very, very difficult question for me to answer. I would say that there's probably a couple things. One, do you have the right consumers, right? And is it a valuable consumer, and is it the consumer that my marketer highly values? Do you have levels of engagement with that consumer that spike more so than the competitive set? And can you use or do you have more data on that consumer and their behavior and their patterns and what leads to kind of conversions? And that's something I think you're willing to pay more for, because your effective investment becomes a lot more plausible to kind of go to your client on than if you just say, hey, I'm paying a $30 CPM when I was paying a 10, right? But if all of a sudden I'm getting 10 times the conversion on 30, then I'm doing better. So again, it really does go back a little bit to that measurement, but by nature, I'm always going to ask to pay the less amount of whatever it is, and this. But again, having said that, I think marketers are willing to value, those strategic things that help lead to conversions and sales and things of that nature. So as long as that's there and that's available, I think people are willing to pay for that. The problem is, I think, is there is a reality that everybody says they have that, and nobody necessarily provides you enough information to distinguish themselves from their competitive set. So all of a sudden you have a hard time seeing the forest through the trees.
So let's talk engagement for a minute, because you've mentioned it a couple of times as something that helps the cause. What are some engagement metrics? How are you defining engagement these days?
Well, I think that there are two ways to kind of look at that, right? The first way is, how people are engaging with the actual environment, right? Be it an app or whatever it is, and how much time they're spending there and what are their behavior patterns there. And I think that's obviously incredibly useful information. But
so you see why we ask for these metrics? Just
right.
saying.
But conversely, right, I need to know what they're doing with my marketing message as well, and how much time they're spending there, and what are they doing there, and what is the representation of that message in that environment doing for their mindset, and how do they change and how does their behavior pattern on this environment lead to a conversion or engagement with my advertising. So all of it's interconnected and interwoven, and those are the kind of data points that we're looking. So we certainly want data from you guys, but we also obviously want data to be able to track ourselves and compare, because there's two different sets that we're talking about: the data with my ad and the data with your environment, and how those things correlate. And the more information we have, obviously we have analysts on our side and people within my group that look at these kinds of things. And it's really, really important and relevant for us to have the most possible information to make these tactical decisions. That helps us figure out where we're going to invest, right? Where are the dollars going to go? And so when you have that kind of whole look, that entire funnel, if you will, I think it becomes a lot easier to kind of distinguish where you're going to invest your dollars.
Yeah. And so that's a good transition to measurement, which is what this topic was supposed to be, but we'll get there, I promise you. And so what types of things are you measuring today, and what is on your wish list for things that you would like to measure?
So that's broad, because if I have 20 clients, my telcos measure things differently than my CPGs, and my CPGs, do different than my retail guys, and so on and so forth. So I don't know that there's like one simple answer to that. I think the most possible, information I can get, and then I can disseminate what makes sense for a specific client or advertiser. But if you're looking at, really kind of baseline points, right? Are they in, and engagement is a very broad word in and of itself, but, are they kind of are you able to have a two-way conversation with the consumer, whatever that is? A lot of that has to do with the creative, in all fairness. But are you having a two-way conversation with the consumer? Again, how much time are they spending there? At the end of the day, are they buying something? Or are they in the mindset to buy something? You look at kind of attitudinal things. Do they feel better about your brand? Are they more likely to purchase your brand? Is there a lift from the norm? A lot of these kind of baseline, basic things. You're certainly looking for, any kind of level of engagement metric, right? So that, a lot of people say clicks don't matter, and I would probably be one of the people who would join up and say clicks are not huge, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but just any level of engagement, a mouse over, a tap, a finger, a swipe, or whatever that is, all of that is very, very relevant for us and helps, start delineating all these various kind of patterns that you can kind of get in each individual environment that might lead to your product being sold.
So let's talk about click-through rate. On a scale of 1 to 10, how important is it to marketers still?
Realistically, how important is it to marketers? I'd probably call it a 5, right? Which is higher than it genuinely should be. I still think it is a measure that provides to some extent, a definitive action by a consumer. So you can't completely discount it, because obviously if I'm tapping, clicking on, and doing that action, you can't discount that I'm all of a sudden engaged with your brand, I'm interested, and there's obviously a reaction from that. I think, whether it's here or in any other place, anybody that looks at the metrics of what click-through rates are realizes that they're shitty. And so I don't think you want to use that as a singular metric. But I also think that to a lot of marketers, it helps simply translate, the consumer engaging with the brand. We're getting into a place where you have, fat fingers and a whole bunch of other potential scenarios that might lead to false clicks and things of that nature. So you really have to start figuring out what are all these other metrics that we just talked about that really start thinking about, your time spent and so on and so forth. But again, I don't want to completely take the click and throw it out. It does have somewhat of a value, but it probably should be, a 2 instead of a 5.
Yeah.
But again, there is levels of sophistication with every various kind of marketers and what they can understand and how they can translate it, and ultimately how they can tell the story up, right? Because once you get to the CMO of a certain organization, talking about a whole host of metrics that don't really resonate with them costs you your job. So you really want to figure out what are the things that can easily translate, and click-through is one that can easily translate. It is an education factor, and as you get, people like, the people in this room who start becoming, CEOs and CMOs and all these other of marketers or large organizations or whatever it is, you'll start to see a sea change happen where people will start looking at different sets of information to understand, the effectiveness of what they're doing. But today, I still think that education factor is evolving.
So speaking of sets of information, how important is location from a targeting, from a measurement, insights? Where does that sort of play into?
It's becoming very important. And not that it wasn't probably never important, but I think we as the entire marketing space are getting smarter about the use of that kind of information. You have more companies who are providing various takes on location. If you're a retailer, you want to know whether or not the consumer ended up somewhere near your store, right? If you're selling a car, you want to know whether or not they're visiting your lots or competitors' lots or whatever it is. So that location information is highly, highly relevant, highly, highly important, and increasingly used more so. So as we invest more in mobile in general, right? So you see the trend of where mobile investment is going. That location metric is becoming much more and more relevant, because you're going to tie that back to, a IDFA. You're going to tie that back to a Google ID. And all of a sudden, you have a pattern or an understanding of what that consumer is doing, and then where is the appropriate time and what is the appropriate message to reach that consumer. And every marketer's goal, and this is somewhat cliche, but every marketer's goal, right, is to reach the consumer at the right time, with the right message to get the right response. And nothing provides a little bit of higher level of information than simply understanding the consumer's location, their habits with that location, and where you could hit them with that message at the right time.
Yeah, yeah. I have a few other questions, but I also want to give you guys an opportunity to, if he was an emoticon, he would be the money bag emoticon. And so I want to allow you guys to ask this emoticon any questions you might have. And so I have a few more, but maybe I'll open up the floor for a moment.
I'm going to make that my Twitter
right, I
icon,
am this emoticon. Better than that, I won't even say it. Any questions about what marketers want these days from us collectively? Really? Because I have like 17 more. Oh, well, we'll start with the lady in the back.
Direct versus network, percentage-wise, effort.
Oh, snap.
I mean, I don't know.
Well, I'm sitting in a network.
Go on, Julian.
Look, I think I think you need a mix of both. And network, personally, I think the model has to evolve to be a little bit more programmatic in nature and a little bit more direct. And I don't think any marketer or agency person is naive to margins that we're paying on that. And often we're willing to kind of sacrifice that if I'm getting a better deal on it. At some point, whether or not that my negotiation tactic is good for the network, I don't know, and I suppose that's not my problem. But conversely, in all fairness, there is value in direct, obviously, and there are times where you can get a whole host of various, what's the best way to put it, value propositions when you're going direct, whether that be a pricing value proposition, whether it be a data value proposition, whether that be structure of a business deal or whatever it is. But I don't think you can ignore aggregation and a company that sees thousands of properties, if you will, and can gather and provide you intel there, right? So it does pay to have somewhat of a healthy mix there. How's that for PC?
Very good.
Just a quick question on Julian. The C-suite with your client seems, not just yours, but just in the industry in general, is moving around quite a bit. We're seeing new titles created, new disciplines that are being interfaced with. What's your take on the CMO today and some of these new, more marketing technology C-level positions that are evolving within these departments? And where do you find the agencies being interfacing most with these days? Is it still the CMO or what's going on?
Well, I'll kind of track back. I think we obviously do work with the CMO and we spend time with them because obviously the CMO is the decision maker on whether or not you maintain a piece of business. And so yes, certainly you integrate there. In terms of what they need to develop into, I think they need to understand the technology space significantly more than they have in the past, right? Which means that they don't necessarily have to be a programmer or an engineer to do so. They just have to have some basic pragmatic logic about how things work and be able to apply that and effectively, and I think Christian said this really effectively earlier, which is hire people that are smarter than them, right? And that's why you're seeing a lot of these new titles and new changes. And I always joke, you can call me the janitor if you pay me enough, right? But people are somewhat title conscious. But I think, at the end of the day, you have scenarios where CMOs are starting to realize that the complexity of the space that they're playing in and the complexity of the consumer, fragmented market where they're finding their people requires them to really have some people that have more, not just technical depth, but just understanding of the various points of interest that consumers might engage with your brand. And so you do have to be a little bit more of, again, I hesitate to use the word technician, but at least an understanding of that. And then you do need to understand how to hire people that can effectively, provide you enough information for you to roll up to your CEO or whatever it is. So I think today's CMO is somebody that is a little bit more conscious of the space significantly more than they have been in the past, right? You're looking at 10 years ago, and yeah, people were doing digital, but it was television, and television was your market, and maybe you had some out of home and you had some radio, but and frankly, it's like that today, but your majority investment is in a single, environment, and so your understanding of the market is somewhat limited to GRPs. If you're a CMO 10 years ago. I think today you do need to understand mobile. You do need to understand digital as a whole, and so on. So I think that makes, that kind of sea change has happened.
Thanks. I think you had a question.
How do you balance measuring success versus trying something new and innovation? It's never been done before ideas. How does...
Well, it is a fine balance, right? Because on one hand, you obviously have to be somewhat successful in what you're trying to do, or you won't have the opportunity to do it. Conversely, there's not a single client that I've ever worked on that isn't thinking that they should be first in innovation and so on and so forth. And all of them want to be number one, and all of them want to do the things. Whether or not they want to pay for it is often where the challenge lies. I think you have to, on my side of the table, I think you have to be able to kind of balance a little bit of how do I get some stuff for free, right? So how do I convince people to give me free tests and things of that nature so I can build the case up to get money down the road for that kind of scenario. And that certainly plays into it, and I've asked for my share of free tests in my own career. But I think you need to definitely have a test and learn mentality in general, but you do have to be wary of trying to over-test and learn. So you do have to kind of feel comfortable about the success of what you're going to test and learn and what you can get out of it, or feel comfortable about what you're really going to learn there and how you would apply that across the board, right? And that's really where the kind of value prop is when you do test and learn is, I'm going to get a learning here, but it shouldn't just apply to this like one little bucket that I'm trying to do. Is how's the learning that I'm going to get help me across, not maybe just even across media type, but across my marketing experience. So that's the kind of balance you do have to play, and it is a healthy mix of give me it for free, and what am I going to learn out of it? And oftentimes I'm certainly willing to pay for those kinds of scenarios as well, but it just that return on investment has to be very, very clear.
Over here.
What ad type on mobile are you seeing that's converting, getting the best engagement right now in terms of video, rich media, native, static?
People like video, sight, sound, and motion. And frankly, and I know this was a question you were going to ask, so that's well played. But people like video. Video is the environment where people are, again, I don't know if engage is the right word, but they're leaned in, especially on mobile devices. So, and I think the majority of my quote-unquote mobile spend probably goes towards that video. There's a value to rich media. I don't know that we've developed the right format that really kind of doesn't piss off the consumer. I know functionally pisses me off when I go to apps and I'm seeing ads that unless they're mine, then they're freaking awesome. But video, yeah, video.
It's almost like it's the gateway drug to mobile advertising, I would say.
Yeah, but it's the gateway drug to all advertising. Let's face it, where sight, sound, and motion is the dominant form of advertising as a whole.
I just wanted to make sure we got porn and drugs in on this panel.
Every panel I do has porn and drugs.
I think I'm going to leave it at that high note. And thank you very much for coming to town and indulging us.